Thank you very much, and thank you for everybody turning up on this Saturday once again. I'm going to read from notes because I think it's very important to be careful about exactly what you say in this circumstance. Just to say, first of all, I don't speak today in my capacity as an MSP or deputy leader or SNP, nor indeed as an ex-Minister for Veterans or ex-Marine. I speak as a human being about a human situation unfolding before our eyes. As a human being seriously concerned about the cycle of violence and loss of life that's encircled Palestine and Israel for decades, and has escalated beyond all imagination over the past month. I'm going to start by saying that I absolutely condemn the horrific terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas on October the 7th. Those abhorrent attacks were beyond words and must be condemned in the strongest possible terms. There is nothing that could justify the acts of brutality that the international community laid witness to on that day. And also to say there is no place in Scotland for anti-Islamic sentiment or anti-Semitic sentiment. And it's a real credit to the people of Scotland and those communities that we have not seen some of the incidents happening that have happened elsewhere. So thank you for that. Imagine for a second, though, that your family, your neighbours, and everyone that you know is now being totally isolated from the rest of the world at a moment's notice, at the hands of a neighbouring country. No food, no water, no electricity, no contact, all through no fault of your own. That's exactly the situation that over 2 million people in Gaza now find themselves in. And let me be absolutely clear, no government, no country, no state should ever be able to exercise that amount of power over another country. But we stand against terrorism and violence of all kinds and recognise that Israel, of course, has a right to defend itself, as all countries do. We need to be clear. Collective punishment is a war crime. And it's wrong that the Palestinian people are currently being collectively punished for the actions of a terrorist group. And the only way that we are going to end the perpetual cycle of violence in Palestine and Israel is by addressing the root cause. That's why we stand for a two-state solution which recognises the sovereignty, the independence, the territorial integrity and the right to self-determination of both Palestine and Israel. Because we know that a Palestinian life is equal to an Israeli life, and that an Israeli life is equal to a Palestinian life. As I say, Israel has a right to defend itself against terrorism, but that response must be proportionate. And the actions of the Israeli government in recent weeks have been anything but. The indiscriminate bombing of the Jabalia refugee camp, which killed dozens and injured potentially up to 400 people, is just the latest example of a disproportionate approach being taken by Israel. Hundreds of people injured and dozens of innocent people dead in order to kill one Hamas commander. It's not a proportionate response, it's a huge oversight and a massive error of judgment. International law applies to everybody, and the international community knows this. That's why over 120 countries, a majority, have voted in favour of a ceasefire at the UN last week. And I'm ashamed to say that the UK was not one of those countries. My party, the SNP's position on this remains the same as it's always been. We were against the blockade of Gaza in 2005. We condemned Hamas as a terrorist organisation. We supported an embargo, as Amnesty International did, on the sale of UK weapons. We stand against the illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank, which are proven to have no basis in international law by the UN. And we called immediately for the release of hostages after the 240 Israelis who were so wrongly abducted during their day-to-day lives. And we continue to call for the release of hostages. We call for the establishment of a humanitarian corridor when this crisis broke out, to allow all innocent Gazans to be able to leave. And we stand here today in support of a ceasefire. And that's why it's time for us to say to the UK government, as we did during the Iraq War, that Scotland stands united. We stand for human rights, and that we say not in our name. We must now act to stop the bloodshed, the needless deaths of thousands of innocents in the war. And there's not a war in history that's not ended with a treaty or an agreement. That cannot happen until there is a ceasefire. And that's why the Scottish Government is absolutely committed to a ceasefire. We rose to that challenge before to support those refugees fleeing war in Ukraine. And we have the infrastructure in place to help people. That's why Scotland has now donated £750,000 to the UN flash appeal. And that's why Scotland has called on the UK Government to use its resettlement scheme to help fleeing Gazans. I know that many people have been affected personally by the war, as indeed our First Minister has been. And many other Scots of all faiths and communities have been too. And the only way we can respond to those divisions that this conflict has caused, both in the region and in this country and across the world, is by appealing to what unites us and not what divides us. Nobody embodies that attitude for peace more than our own Scottish First Minister, Humza Yousaf, whose family recently returned home after being trapped in the war-torn Gaza Strip for weeks. He attended a service of prayer and solidarity with Scotland's Jewish community, physically embracing the mother of one of the victims of Hamas terrorism, and meeting with members of Scotland's Palestinian community, saying, "Your grief is my grief." That is statesmanship, that's humanitarianism, and that is how we do things in this country. So today at this rally and every day we stand united as Scots of different backgrounds, of all faiths and none, to call for a ceasefire, an end to the cycle of violence in Palestine and in Israel, and the establishment of a permanent, peaceful and internationally recognised independent Palestinian state, standing side by side with a permanent, peaceful and internationally recognised Israeli state. And we join together as Scotland, as we did during the Iraq War, to condemn the UK government's approach to this war, and we say, not in our name.
Assalamu alaikum! Assalamu alaikum!